Maybe you're like me, and as you get older, you're losing your hair. Some of that wasn't my choice, because I think hereditarily I'm sort of lose it. But I cut it off because I like it. I like being bald. I've liked that for a long time. Maybe you feel like that too. But there's others that don't choose to lose their hair. There's a story in Judges, and it begins in chapter 13 actually and goes through 16. It's the life of Samson. Samson is known for his hair, and it's long hair, but it's connected to his strength, God-given strength. And in that, we see actually, he doesn't cut his hair, and in that being faithful there, God uses him in this very volatile time in the book of Judges, which are leaders in Israel. As Joshua moves them into the new land, there's decades and decades, and actually over hundreds of years, where they're trying to fight against the enemies that are there and pushing against them. And so what we see these judges or leaders rise up to push back against the enemies, and this is one of them, Samson, and he was known for his strength. He was known for his strength, and it was tied to his hair. But late in his life, we see this very self-reliant person doing God's work, supposedly, right? And just having a bunch of stuff. The story's filled with craziness in it and ancient Near Eastern stuff going on. There's a lot of stuff, background history we got to know. It's complicated in some situations. I'm like, what? But at the end, he's duped into letting his hair get cut by his enemies. And in that process, even though it sounds odd maybe, his hair is cut and he loses his strength. He becomes like any other man. And in that moment, he is then imprisoned, shackles, taken, and his eyes are popped out. And in that place, and then he's put basically as a servant slave. This actually happens over and over through Judges. They have the sin or rebellion against God. Then we have actually servitude, where they're serving, and then they cry out supplication, and then salvation. God delivers them in some way. But this cycle keeps happening, and they're in this cycle where Samson, for the first time really, no longer having his strength, no longer having his real eyesight, he's finally able to see. Some people don't choose to cut their hair. If hair is a symbol of strength, I wonder where you and our lives have had places where it has been removed for a season or maybe for a long time. Maybe the place of strength or self-reliance that we have, maybe even the natural faculties of sight are taken away, and we feel for the first time maybe more imprisoned and more isolated than ever. And in that story at that time in Samson's life, he prays for the first time, actually, in the text it sees. But right before that, right before he prays, we see a little phrase that stands out to me. It's in chapter 16 at the end of his life, in verse 22. After all these horrible things have happened to him, all of a sudden it says, "But the hair on Samson's head began to grow again after it had been shaved." There's a sense I have grace off to the side. I've had that for a long time. I see this God, even in the midst of his messed up life and everything else, that as he's at his lowest place, God keeps extending grace to him, reminding him. And in that moment, God hasn't given up on him. And God is present. Even though we don't see Samson praying at all through his life almost. I mean, he's just self-reliant, doing all these things, supposedly in the name of the Lord. But then, at the end of his life, we hear him pray once. And at that moment, when he's brought out, as he's in prison, he's brought out, and there's a huge party, and they're going to mock him, and they're saying, "Dagon, our God is the best, and he's the greatest, and your God doesn't exist, and we're the greatest." And they're just actually in this moment where all the officials and all the people that have hated him and all the people that are oppressing Israel are all in the same place. Samson says, "One last time, God, give me strength so that your people can be protected, that we can actually avenge some of the things that are going on." And in this volatile time, God gives that to him. But I'm brought back to a question that I sensed actually when I saw a person once that had their hair cut or lost their hair because of chemotherapy. They are a follower of Jesus that I see so much grace and strength in, not like Samson actually, but what I saw was in the same way Samson received grace with the hair beginning to grow, I saw this person's hair begin to grow back after chemotherapy. And I in my spirit, I remembered this passage. Because for me, it's this place that God doesn't give up with us. And in that moment, he's still ready to hear our prayer. I don't know if you're in the midst of that situation now in your life. I don't know if you've lost your hair, literally or figuratively, or had a situation where you're no longer able to see. in ways that you did before. But one thing I do know is that God is always ready to hear us, especially in those places where we've lost all the things that we've known. And Samson prayed for the first time in his life in the text. 20 years a leader, we hear one prayer. I wonder if this is when he saw God most clearly. And I wonder for us, if you're in that situation or you've been in a situation like that, I wonder how God might want to meet you now. I want you to ask this question in prayer, and then you can read chapter 13 through 16 if you want, but ask this question to God. What is my own self-reliant strength? What's my hair strength connected to? And God, has there ever been a time when that's been taken from me in a way that helped me see you and my reliance on you more? I'll see you tomorrow.